ANC Treasurer Paul Mashatile confirming that the ANC is looking at the EFF for talks about coalitions in councils around the country. That's after the ANC failed to get an outright majority in key municipalities. He says the ANC's Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte, has been given a mandate to start talks on Saturday with the EFF. This week, Julius Malema said his party would only get into a coalition with the ANC if they voted with the Red Berets in Parliament to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow land expropriation without compensation.
The meeting will still happen on Sunday, but the DSG has been given a mandate to start talking to various parties. Obviously, the agreements will be finalized by the Extended Working Committee, but we can start talks about talks with other parties that are willing to talk to us, and we may be starting discussions with the EFF tomorrow if we are able to get hold of them. We are still trying to find them. Then a number of other smaller parties. And then, of course, those who don't want to talk to us, we will leave them alone, because I don't think it's worth running after people who don't want to talk to you.
Let's talk a little bit more about what that is going to mean, but also what these local results mean for the ANC. A former member of the ANC is the former Premier of Gauteng, Mbazima Shilowa, joins us now. Mr. Shilowa, good afternoon to you. We'll talk about your views on the ANC in a moment, but just this news developing this afternoon, the ANC wanting to meet with the EFF over the weekend, maybe even tomorrow, to discuss coalitions. Do you think it'll actually work? Do you think they'll be able to govern together in coalitions and councils?
I think it is possible to govern together, but it's really going to depend on what is it that the ANC commit itself to. Because not only in that discussion with the EFF, but it seems that most of the parties in seeking to discuss coalitions, there's very little said about, this is what we said about the people of Alexander, of Diepsloot, of Kiani, and therefore what should be our program is more about what card can I be able to get in those areas. So if you look at the EFF and the ANC, the EFF would have said that, well, they'll talk to the ANC if the ANC commit to vote with them with regard to Section 25 in Parliament, which has got very little to do with what should be happening with the people on the ground. So, yes, it's possible to work together, but it appears to me that there's very little about the people and more about self-serving by the different political parties, including other parties that, that may be wanting to enter into discussions with the DA or and so forth.
Well, almost in a way to support what you say is what appears to be the EFF demand that the ANC vote with it on land expropriation without compensation. This gets to the heart of whether land should be nationalized or not, which is what the EFF wants. The ANC wants land tenure. I mean, they haven't agreed in the past. I don't know if they'll agree on that now.
Yes, but you see, if they were to agree now, it would say to you that it has got nothing to do with the principle that the ANC was holding on to. It will have to do with them wanting to be able to have access to the resources in the 6 metros and or other municipalities that are hung up. Because if you are for principle, you would say, look, we will discuss the whole issue of Section 25 when we're back in Parliament. But at the moment in Johannesburg, can we look at what is it that you promised the people of Johannesburg and what we promised, and say, where are the commonalities in terms of that program, and how can we then implement it?
You suggested, you wrote this, I think, on News 24, that the ANC is becoming a rural party. People have been talking about this possibility for some time. Why do you think that's now happened, that the ANC is a rural party?
Well, let me say that, it's important to acknowledge that the ANC remains the largest majority party across the country, both in rural and urban areas. But when it comes to issues of governance at municipality level, it's clear that it has lost any relevance to the people in the urban centers, in small towns, other than those that are attached to rural areas such as Polokwane or maybe Buffalo City and so forth. But if you look at mining towns and all of that, it's clear that those people have said that the ANC does not speak for us. And what I'm really saying is that it's up to the ANC to decide, does it want, like ZANU-PF, to become a rural party on a permanent basis to people whom it is also not even supplying basic amenities, necessities such as water, electricity, sanitation, and roads? Or does it want to say, yes, we have gotten a lot of support in rural areas, we must deal with them, but also that because we're in alliance with COSATU and the Communist Party, who all speak about the issue of the proletariat, the working class, that therefore we're going to do everything to regain the trust of people in urban centers. Because that's really where resources and opportunity for development lies. If you don't go that route, areas just like Gauteng, which is really, have got very little rural area and a small patch of urban area, you might as well forget about it.
What's interesting about what you say is that even in some of the rural provinces, the ANC didn't do very well. I mean, in the Free State, it got 50.61%, just over 50%. And I mean, the Free State, sure, it's a relatively small province by population, has a metro. But that's, I mean, I never thought the ANC would get that low in the Free State.
Yes, but not only the Free State. I mean, if you look at Mpumalanga, you know, there are two small towns there, which again, NUM should be the biggest party there. SAMU, I mean, a trade union. SAMU is the biggest union. Sakau is the biggest union. But you can see that even those people have not gone with them. So it's very clear that, you know, they have not been able to capture that. But also, and this applies not just to the ANC, but even to other parties, the youth remain a missing link to be captured for all of those, because even with the ANC traditional base staying away, if more youth had gone out and voted for it, they would have done better. Or if the youth had gone out and voted for the EFF or the BA, they would even have done better as well.
Up until this point, and what's so important about all of this is that up until this point, the ANC has been the only party in democratic South Africa, you could actually argue ever, which has been able to put together a national coalition of interests. So it's won votes from rich people, poor people, white people, black people, Indian people, colored people, South African Chinese people, people across our society. No other party in our history has come close to that. So if the ANC falls, what next?
If the ANC falls, I think that people will recreate another ANC, not in name, but in terms of ensuring that we need a political party. And I think people are very clear. If you leave aside, you know, parties in the periphery that are looking at, well, we want to look at Afrikaner interest, we want to look at African interest, generally South Africans would want a political home where the party is able to look at the interests of broader people. I mean, if you take Gauteng as an example, you know, people understand that, well, some live in Sandton, others in Alexander, but they would want a Johannesburg that works not just for the people of Sandton or for Alexander, but that works for all of them, be they in Diepsloot, Soweto, and all of those particular areas. So I think it is important for the ANC to reconnect with its traditional base, but even more important is that for other parties, they need to think beyond their own little issues and worry about, you know, garnering support across South Africans, across the race, across class, religion.
Is there a risk that people are overplaying what's happened in this election? So in 2016, the ANC got 53.9% of the national vote. But in the 2019 national election, it got 57.5%. In other words, it did do better in the national election, on the national vote, than it did in terms of share of the national vote in the local election. I mean, the chances are this will happen again in 2024.
Well, they are not overplaying it, because if only it was the ANC that have lost support, because I think what is important about the ANC is that it has garnered support below 50% overall, and that it has further lost in metros such as eThekwini and other small towns beyond what it has. But also that does not mean that the other parties, like the DA and the EFF, have been able to take advantage of that. So there are two issues at play. The first one is how the ANC is faring, and that it means that internal warfare is going to be the order of the day inside the ANC, because, you know, just imagine the number of councillors who have not been able to make it, who were looking at making it. There's just little incentives that the ANC can be able to dish out to ensure that you keep everybody inside the tent, you know. So we're not overplaying it. I think it's also a worry about a fragmentation of the ANC, because I distinguish between people just feeling, look, of course, you know, the ANC should fall, you know, but also to one that says, if it falls, it's important that there is something that is going to be able to replace it. Otherwise, there's just going to be further fragmentation.
There's some things and some national debates that might change quite dramatically, and I'm talking about governance debates, and that might change quite dramatically because the ANC is going to want to stay in power. So a good example would be a basic income grant. We've been having this conversation about a basic income grant. I mean, the Democratic Alliance under Tony Leon supported a basic income grant and has for many, many years. It's never been implemented. I would suggest, maybe I'm being a little trutterig when I do this, but I would suggest that a basic income grant will be implemented by the ANC before the 2024 election.
There's no debate that is going to be implemented, and it may have something to do with the outcome of the local elections, but it will also have to do with the pressure that is there. But I think even though it's implemented, I'm not sure it's going to be about the basic income grant, because even now there are rumblings that Enoch Gorongwana is speaking less about the basic income grant, but more about a family grant. In other words, rather than per individual, it will be per household, which would be a very difficult issue. But I've got no doubt, you know, Stephen, that all political parties, when they are in trouble, they throw money at the trouble. So the ANC won't be the first, and it's not going to be the last.
Is there a risk, and I mean, Mr. Shiro, I realize that maybe I'm being overly cynical, but is there a risk that certain things could be damaged as a result? So again, to use the basic income grant as the useful example it is, there are very strong arguments for one, but there are strong arguments against one. And the arguments would be that we can't afford it, that you would break the bank, we would have to borrow to finance, you know, living a basic income grant when we literally can't borrow anymore. So is there a risk there could be damage done in the process heading into 2024 with things so close?
I think it will be damaged if all we do is to look at the issue of the basic income grant. But I think if the ANC was to look not just at the basic income grant, but to say, what do we need to do to grow the economy, to create jobs, to ensure quality health and education, such that even though we will provide for social grants, for basic income grant and other grants, that we try as much as possible to remove those who are capable of doing that. Secondly, to deal with issues of corruption, because, you know, part of my worry, even though I'm someone who supports the basic income grant, is that, you know, it may just end up being paid even to people who don't deserve it. So unless you deal with those issues and deal with issues of corruption, fraud, and I mean, you saw, Stephen, how just with the TERS, you know, people who are working for government were themselves beneficiaries of the TERS. So if you don't clean up issues of corruption, this money is just going to go into a black hole.
Lots of things are going to happen now, heading into 2024, and one of those things, I think, is going to be more pressure on the Electoral Commission. There's been a lot of criticism of the IEC during this election. A lot of that criticism may be warranted, but no one, I mean, I can think of one example, but none of the political parties have gone to the Electoral Court and won. How do you feel about the IEC going into 2024?
I think that the IEC is in a good position in terms of how it deals with issues, but there were areas now that it dropped the ball. I think firstly it was the IEC that began to entertain this notion of postponement of the election, that they didn't go to Parliament to say, please sort out this issue, and rather went to court. But also to an extent that there were issues related to long queues and machinery, they would be there. But that's really as far as you can go. You know, beyond that, there's very little that can be pointed as fingers. So of course, people will always want to point fingers at the IEC. But I think that, you know, they won't go to court because nobody can be able to say with real evidence, we was robbed.
Mashatile, thanks very much indeed. Do appreciate it. Writing at News 24, but former Premier of Gauteng. Very interesting insights. Lots more to